Welcome to the Quiet Warrior Show, where we help top leaders find their pathway to incredible success and a lifetime of happiness. Here is your host, Tom Dutta, the Quiet Warrior.
Hey everybody, Tom Dutta, the Quiet Warrior here. That's Tom Dutta like butter. And we're live streaming. What is that? The next generation of podcasting. So you'll find us right now on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, and Rumble, our newest feed that I'm just loving. So let me tell you something. I read a lot of books, but I was blown away by a book that I just read. And the guest that we're going to bring on in just a couple minutes, he and particularly his father, are behind the collection of these books, and you're going to want to stick around till the very end. We got a few surprises. So what happens when you're entrusted with preserving one of America's greatest literary legacies? How do you keep 330 million books selling decades after the author passes? This is all about a father's determination passing to a son's dedication. Now, Louis L'Amour went from living in a car to selling over 330 million books worldwide. What can we learn from a man who lived countless lives, was a circus worker, a merchant seaman, a miner, boxer, becoming America's most beloved Western novelist at age 60? Well, here to tell us all about that is his son, Beau. Now, Beau is the son of the legendary author Louis L'Amour and the dedicated steward of his father's remarkable literary estate. He's an entertainment industry jack of all trades who's helped sell over 120 million books since his father's passing and continues to unveil lost treasures from the L'Amour legacy. Now he's here to talk about perseverance. We're going to do some storytelling in Plato's Garden and some surprises along the way. So I'm going to bring him on the stage. Welcome, Beau L'Amour. Welcome, Beau.
Thank you very much. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Man, we were just talking when you're in the green room about where you're born, and you mentioned something about Hollywood. Just to tease us a bit about those early roots.
The area of Los Angeles that I grew up in was West Hollywood, California. So this was in the 1960s, and it was pretty wild. It was like Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco or the East Village in New York, and probably not the environment a lot of people think of Louis L'Amour starting his career in, but it was it was very interesting. It was a very, very dynamic place, and definitely the city of rock and roll for Los Angeles.
Yeah, absolutely. Just riffing with you and sharing a story. So my wife was born just outside of Rome, a place called Palena in Italy, and I'm an immigrant. Landed in my home here, West Canada, probably at age 5. Beau and Anna came, and we met, and we've been married, celebrating 30 years coming up. So it's a blessing. And her aunt ran an Italian restaurant in Hollywood. And my wife said she used to go down there and visit and drive her aunt's, I think she had a Rolls Royce or something, and used to hear stories. There's one crazy story about how I think some of the greats, Frank Sinatra, people like that would come in, and there are also sorts of history back there. So it's great to meet a guy like you. Are you ready to have some fun and go into Plato's Garden?
Whatever that is, I guess.
Okay. All right, let's do it. So just watch this. What would it be like to go into Plato's Garden? Well, Beau, we're here. Welcome to Plato's Garden. Our audience are watching and listening. So a little bit on why we're doing this. Plato's Garden was Plato was an Athenian philosopher during the classical period in ancient Greece, Beau, founder of the Platonist school of thought and the academy from the word academia. Apparently, it was the first institution of higher learning in the Western world. And so we're going to tell stories and take you through a journey. You won't even know this is happening. It's called critical thinking. So we're going to touch on the things that have influenced the context of not only your life and work, but your late father's. So we'll go into three areas: macro, which is what was going on in the world around all of you, and then mezzo, which is the sector of the industry. What are the influences from there? And my favorite one is micro. What was happening in your life, and particularly as we talk about your late father, Louis, and bringing all that together. What happens is the audience gets a deeper insight into who you are and what this story is all about. Before I do that, I want to tease you to hold up a book. I think you got a pretty cool book there that we were just talking about. You want to hold up the one that you sent me?
So this is the one that I sent you.
Awesome. Read the title out to us.
Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures, and if I'm going to read the sort of subtitle thing, it says Unfinished Manuscripts, Mysterious Stories, and Lost Notes from one of the world's most popular novelists.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I've got a copy here, everyone. I collect them, and it's been signed. I'm really thrilled. I've read it cover to cover. I also bought the audiobook, and I'm going to talk about that a bit too. But let's get into Plato's Garden. I'm going to set this up just with a comment. Find my right piece of paper here. All right. So I'm going to set the scene here in Plato's. So, Beau, your father's journey reads like one of his own novels, from living in a car during the Depression to becoming America's best-selling author. And your own journey as the guardian of his legacy is equally compelling. So I want to begin with the moment in 1988 when you inherited this enormous responsibility. What was it like stepping into the role of preserving your father's voice?
I'm not sure that it was anything all that distinct. I had been working with my dad's work in the publishing industry for several years. From that point, I started off working with some of the art directors to manage the covers of his books, and then I moved into working in the audio publishing field. In those days, that was very new. I mean, I was literally there when the first two ladies at Bantam Books set up their commercial audio publishing division.
Yeah.
And in those days, we did books on tape, as we called them at the time, as dramatized audios. So almost like a radio drama with full cast and sound effects and music and all that kind of thing. So I had been doing that for a number of years, both adapting my dad's work into that medium, and then also working with him to do some of the introductions to those things. And so I just kind of slipped sideways into it. Our business had been very much organized around his producing the new book a couple of times a year. And I recognized that was something that wasn't going to continue, and started to reorganize our business around supporting the entirety of the backlist, so our entire catalog.
Yeah.
And it just kind of went on. It just kind of went on from there.
That's incredible. I know in the studio where you are, your home, you've got a bookcase. I can't even imagine the amount of content and things that you have in this collection. I want to hold this up, just show it to the audience. I know it's on camera here. What's that picture of?
Oh, that's a photograph of my dad in his West Hollywood office, in our West Hollywood house. And I sort of jokingly say, this is how I remember my father at work. I don't know who took that photograph, but it's taken from, about the eye level of a 5-year-old. Yeah. So it always feels like something I remember very well.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And everyone, again, I'm talking about the book that I've read. There's much more of the collection we'll hear about. But there's some great pictures in there. And the reason I sent that up is I want to just throw something evocative out. Again, we're in the micro part of the story here. So a little bit about you in here. We're going to humanize you, find out more. But, I call this living in the shadow. So growing up as a son of Louis must have been extraordinary. At least that's what I think from looking at what your dad did. What was it like having a dad who lived so many lives before you were born? And the other part of it, just comment on, is that there are two types of children. Some who say, I don't want to have anything to do with my dad's business because he was never there, he was never home, or whatever the reason is, they're rebellious. And then the others who say, wow, I want to continue this legacy.
Well, my dad was always home because he worked at home, and obviously I'm not that first more rebellious type of kid. I don't have any memory of kind of growing up in his shadow.
Yeah.
It's possible that today I deal with that a little bit more because many of the people that I worked with in the publishing business have moved on to other things and things like that. And there is sort of a new generation, both in publishing and in film and all these other things. It's sort of like, well, your dad was somebody,
Mm.
therefore, you don't really have anything to offer.
Yeah.
And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But it's anybody who's thinking, I don't know about this work and this catalog and the Western genre and publishing in general, um, should should really think again. I mean, I grew up under the desk of the people that started the paperback business, and I have, either my memories or their memories or my dad's memories that go back way before, way before my birth in that industry. I carry a small amount of the institutional memory particular uh, of that particular industry, maybe better than anybody my age. I would certainly guess that there are people in their
Yeah.
70s, 80s, 90s, who have much more sophisticated and full uh, memory of how the book business evolved to what it is, and truly to a certain extent how Hollywood evolved to where it is. But I think if you look down at somebody in their early 60s, there aren't very many of us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to put a picture on the screen here. Those who are in the video can see this pretty strapping looking guy there. Pretty cool looking picture. I mean, certainly carrying around on your shoulders the legacy of your dad's work, but also, you're pretty tall and have a pretty good presence on screen standing beside that book. I want to get into, I call it, this one is to help us understand navigating the loss. So beyond losing your dad, and I think it was in 1988, correct me if I'm wrong, you also faced losing what people know is an American icon. And so how do you navigate grief during that time, and was able to make the business decisions about the legacy during that? Because I'm assuming it must have been a challenge. My dad passed away in January 2018, and we know what it's like to lose a parent.
Yeah, it's always hard. I remember for years there was, I would reach for the phone to call my father, and he wasn't there. That's always very tough. Working with his material and a great deal of his life. One of the things we can talk about with Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures, not just this one book, but the whole series of them, is that it's very much a professional biography of my father, and taken all together, it's very much a professional
Yeah.
biography of my father. And so I've dealt a lot with his life, and I think that helps keep you engaged with the person,
Yeah.
and really uh, really helps. But it's it's tough. I mean, losing somebody that you uh, deeply care about, losing somebody who's a mentor and various other things is, you wish all the time that they were there, that you could hear their voice and
Yeah.
things of that sort.
Yeah. It's thank you for sharing that. And I'm sorry for your loss. It still is fresh when you talk about the loss of a parent. I know. Yeah. Your mom's still around?
She is.
Yeah. So who influenced you the most, mom or dad? And in what way would you say?
Oh gosh, I have no idea. I mean, both of them were very strong characters,
Yeah.
are very strong characters in the case
Yeah.
of my mother.
Yep.
and very, very different. So there's no competition in their influence.
There's some really cute things in the book. Again, I just got it here with me. I think there's one. It's about how something about. I think it was you or somebody that said he asked your dad when he was typing, "Why are you typing so fast?" And he said something like, "I want to see how the story turns out," or something like that.
That's
Just
correct.
yeah. So there must be a lot of that in the book. I want to do something fun with you here. Do you like doing reading? I want to do a quick.
I'm terrible. So I'm awful at reading, and I'm really, really, really picky about it because
Are you?
I worked in the audio publishing business for
Okay.
so long. So I'm just like I'm constantly like, no, wait, I got to try that again. That wasn't perfect. So no, I don't want to do any reading. But actually, at this moment, let me just pop in for a moment and say,
Yeah.
let me describe what this project is, what
Yeah.
Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures is, because it's a little
Please do.
strange. There are two books, so Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures,
Yeah.
volumes 1 and 2, which are unfinished or unpublished novels or short stories or plans for novels that my dad didn't finish uh, during his career, and then I will present them occasionally. If there were multiple drafts, I'll either present them as individual
Yeah.
drafts, which
Yeah.
you can kind of see his progression on, or I'll meld them together into a single kind of best of draft. And then I will jump in at the end or partway through and discuss what he was doing and why he was doing it. Sometimes I have correspondence. Sometimes I have pieces of his journals, personal memories, things of that sort, to explain what he was attempting to do. Uh, there is another book, No Traveler Returns,
Oh,
and
nice.
this book was my dad's first novel that he did not finish, and I did finish, so we kind of co-wrote it. And so that's another piece of Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures. That's another one of the
Yeah.
potentially lost treasures. And then there's about 30. There's more than 30. I'm still working on a few, so I'm not entirely sure how many there will be. There's 30 postscripts that go into his previously published novels, the novels that everybody's read and many people know. And in those, I do the same thing. I try and tell the story behind the story, how he came to write that particular thing. Sometimes the Lost Treasures postscript is about him doing research. Sometimes it's about a relationship that he had with the area he worked there or something of the sort. Sometimes it's about the making of the movie. There's several of them I wouldn't say in a row, but there's several of the Lost Treasures postscripts that deal with my dad's friendship with Katharine Hepburn and how that led to certain stories being written, things like that. So it's kind of like the bonus features you used to see on DVDs, you know.
Oh, all right. So now I'm going to chime in here. This is riffing storytelling back and forth. So, Beau is triggering my brain here, everyone. So I got the book here. The one that he kindly sent me. Another plug, shameless plug for that Lost Treasures Volume 1. But I'm gonna just tell you when I pick this up, like I look at the contents here and look at this is like here we go. Number 1, Jeremy Lacord, the first 4 chapters of a Western horror novel. Number 2, Trail of Tears, the first 7 chapters of a historical novel. Number 4, John Banta, several beginnings to a Western novel. And what blew my mind about the book and it drove me crazy is like when I got it, it was making me feel super crazy. I couldn't wait to open it because I'm going like, who would find a book like this where it's like the pieces of this, and this. So I'm going to actually read a little paragraph off the beginning here just to honor
Wonderful.
you. And this is actually by you. And this book, this is what started for me. This book may drive you crazy. That's why I said that. What it contains is mysterious and fascinating, frustrating, and more often than not, tragically incomplete. It is a look behind the curtain into a world of what might have been. It is a look under the hood at how the machinery of a writing career that lasted over half a century functioned. It is also a look at the struggle to express an idea and how difficult it can be to bend the unruly process of creativity to one's will. This is the story of the debris, the chaff, the waste heat that a writer produces, the stuff that never makes it to the editor's desk, the stack of pages never graced by a final, the end. I'll stop there. So I just want to throw out a question or a thought to you to riff on. How do you decide to continue honoring this legacy? How do you decide what to put in there to carry on his intentions, or is that just a bit of an art?
I think it's a lot more practical than that. In these two particular books, this and the Volume 2 version,
Yeah,
I looked for things that were long enough so that the trajectory of the story got somewhere. So there are other pieces. Many of them are on the Lost Treasures website, but the stuff that went into the book, the stuff that I actually asked people to pay for, one of the things that one of the criterias that I had was that wherever the story was, it had to start somewhere and it had to get somewhere, not just sort of start somewhere and
yeah,
kind of, okay, now I don't have anything more to say about it, because there were quite a few of those. And then I had to have something to say about it. So there had to be something in addition to that where I had more information. I had a continuing insight of my own that I could give somebody. Otherwise, it was not included. But of course, the amazing thing about this is, my dad was incredibly productive. He wrote 92 novels,
wow,
250 short stories. And at the same time, you think, okay, that's tremendous. But here's 80 beginnings of things. And these are the things that didn't work. These were his probably the most challenging projects. Of course, they were the most challenging projects because they were the projects he didn't know how to finish, or he didn't get to finish in
sure.
one way or another. So the most interesting subject matter that he took on in his life is in these two books. And some of it's very very strange. He wrote several versions of a story, trying to create a story about people with reincarnated lives. He wrote stories that there's stories in here that have a deep connection to his own personal life
Yeah,
and have sections of his own personal life in them. So it's an interesting book. I say it'll drive you crazy because a lot of the material is unfinished.
yeah.
But
Well, that's what I love the most about it. I'm a big advocate for neuroscience, understanding the brain. In my backstory, I had a concussion years ago, so I had to really get myself through that. And dopamine hit releases in the brain, and anticipating what's coming next, and you get all these feelings. Reading this book, it was like a roller coaster, and it really was enthralling because of that approach you just talked about, where it wasn't like this long drawn out story, but there was these multiple little chapters and pieces, and it got me in my imagination trying to figure out what comes next, or creating that next part of the story, which I really love doing. Want to just get back into the publishing reality. I can imagine a lot of authors, I assume their works vanish within years after they die, or at least that's my assumption. Yet what's happened here is, no, I don't think any of the books have gone out of print, but basically, what obstacles did you overcome to continue or keep this collection of his work going?
it's always a challenge to keep all the different levels of the industry
Yeah,
engaged.
yeah,
So a lot of times people will think about the writer and the reader, but there's a lot in between. And one of the things about this project is when you have a legacy situation like we do, it doesn't hurt to have something up your sleeve that nobody knows you've got, to pull out and
yeah,
either hit the booksellers with or hit the publisher with, and they're sort of like, oh, I shouldn't be taking this person for granted.
yeah,
There's still some kind of surprising element that they pulled out of the hat and have for us. And so Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures, to a certain extent, was because booksellers, a certain bookseller in particular, a large bookseller, was getting kind of bored of putting our stuff on the racks, and that there hadn't been any changes.
Yeah.
And they kind of called up the publisher and said, can you just change the covers or something? And I was like, that's cheap. That, if you feel like a change is demanded, it's like, let me give you a real change. Here's a whole reinvention of
Yeah.
the brand.
Sure.
So you have to do stuff like that occasionally. I back in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was really early 2000s era, we had a moment where this was before just-in-time inventory really took over the business, where the publisher didn't have all that much in the warehouse. At this point, they had lots and lots in the warehouses, and they
Yeah.
wanted to up price their books. So they had a whole bunch of books that had the old prices printed on them. And one of the things that I did was I created a marketing campaign where we gave the old lower printed price books to the military. And so we gave
Nice.
about 1 million books to the
Wow.
armed services. And you kind of got to just keep your ear to the ground and
Yeah.
be constantly seeing do you have a unbelievable number of books in the warehouse that are going to get pulped if you don't do something with them? Do you I can remember I used to take meetings all the time at Random House, and one of the divisions was saying, well, we really need a piece of cover art. We have to commission a new piece of cover art for this. And I had just had a meeting with the art department, and we had gone through their files, and I had noticed a couple of pieces of art
Sure.
that were commissioned for us, but we'd never used them. And I said, you don't have to buy that. It's down at the art department. So a lot of it's just constantly connecting the dots, the big dots, the military giveaway, the little dots, the cover art thing,
Sure.
and just being aware of the entirety of the whole constellation that you're
Yeah.
dealing with.
Boy, well done on the military piece. I can just visualize, because I'm visual, a soldier somewhere sitting reading a book and just escaping in the work. And I think,
Listen, was a wonderful opportunity for us, because it's a relatively captive audience. They do have to sit places and wait for things to happen
yeah,
constantly. And they're young. They read a couple of books. They like them. They're a customer for so many more. You're not just giving away one book. You're potentially selling 100 books. So
that's cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
you have to just keep thinking about the entire situation like that.
Yeah. Just going to put that picture back on there. Everybody, we're here with Beau L'Amour, late Louis L'Amour's son, and he's talking to us about his vision and how keeping the legacy of his dad's work going. Pretty amazing. There's another book that you brought to show us. Just, I think you have it there with you. Hold that one up and just tell us the title.
Okay, so this is Law of the Desert Born.
What is that?
This is a graphic novel. So I have to.
I'm going to full screen you for a sec so we can show that off.
Yeah, okay.
Just tell us what it is. Wow.
All right. So it's a graphic novel. It's a very fancy comic book. It's very beautifully produced. And this came from a screenplay that I wrote with Catherine Nolan, a wonderful collaborator of mine, a number of years ago. And we had the opportunity to do a graphic novel, and we ended up with a fantastic artist. And the book went on to, it was noted as one of the year's best in the Village Voice. It was nominated for an Eisner Award, which is the comic book equivalent of an Academy Award. And really,
that's incredible.
Was a remarkable project. And it was also a remarkable project in that everyone in it just collaborated and melded really, really well. I mean, we were just a tight-knit team. Everybody knew their role. Everybody was open to everybody else commenting on everybody else's role.
Yeah.
Everybody had the level at which they could say no to something
Sure.
happening, which in my opinion always makes you less likely to say no. So if you absolutely can say, oh no, that's not going to happen, then you're less likely to do it. You know,
Yeah.
many times with other types of projects, you see something going wrong and you just want to dive in and get it absolutely stopped dead as soon as you possibly can, because you're afraid of, you know, kind of the domino principle.
Yeah.
But when you absolutely have control of something, you're less likely to do that. You're like, say, well, I'm a little worried about that. Let's experiment. Let's see where that goes.
That's
And
very cool.
it was a terrific couple of years
Remarkable.
working on that.
I was thinking to see if I can twist your arm to get a copy of that, or I'll buy it for sure.
Sure.
And so, you know, I want to surprise you. So again, we're live here, everyone. So this will be cleaned up when we do the final production. I'm going to bring something on the screen in a minute related to the audiobook, but I'm going to just throw something out for you to think about. If you were at your today standing at the podium at your father's funeral, and you were to say something about who he was, what would you say?
Well, I think, you know, the thing that people don't, that the audience members don't necessarily want to hear, but I think it's incredibly important, is my dad's career, which is of course how he's publicly known, was really the least of him. He was a really extraordinary human being. He was really extraordinarily uh, well educated. He educated himself. He left school when he was in the 10th grade, and just, you know, took care of that on his own. And he was a really kind man. I'm not sure that that's true throughout his entire life, which I've studied quite a bit, but
Yeah.
he matured enormously as he became successful in the latter half of his life,
Yeah.
and really became an incredible human being. So that's probably what I'd say.
What a nice thing to say. Thank you for sharing that. There's another picture. What are we looking at there?
You're looking at my dad in his office in our house in West Los Angeles, and that's how it was organized. Just piles and piles and piles of paper. We used to joke that it wasn't so important to know where something was, but you had to know what it was under.
In listening to and reading this particular book, Volume 1, it characterized his routine. Just tell us quickly about that, because I seem to remember, like, he got up and he was all day long, dinner, then after dinner. Just share a bit of that with us for his writing routine.
He would generally get up before dawn, and he would get himself down into his office and he would start writing.
Yeah.
And he'd keep at it until breakfast was ready. Then he'd have breakfast with my sister and I, and rather wonderfully, he would generally read to us from something he was reading for research or something he thought we should experience. Yeah. And then he, excuse me just a second, I have to take a drink.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then he was back at it. Sometimes he'd have lunch at the house. Sometimes he would go out to lunch and do some other kind of business. If he had anybody that wanted to meet with him business-wise, that's when he'd do it. Came back, generally exercised for an hour or two, then was back at it until dinner, and often after dinner. So Dad had taught himself one way or another to write almost directly from his unconscious. That's when you read that quote earlier about wanting to know how the story turned out. That's very much what that was. And you do not let those doors close lightly. If you don't keep that pathway open, it will close, and it's difficult to get it open again. And so he wanted to, you know, he tried to write every single day. He didn't, it scared him to take a couple of days off, because it became, the more days off he took, the more difficult it was to get back in the flow of being able to write that way.
Yeah, I'm blown away, especially as a published author myself. I can't even imagine looking at some of the pictures in the book of him sitting at one of those manual typewriters. And we have to remember, like, as I'm talking about this today, there's AI, people collaborate to write with that. There's computers and Microsoft Word and all these tools. Your dad basically sat at a little typewriter and typed all day long. And man, I can write, but to get stuff out of my head and keep it flowing, and then to hear what you said about Louis in the morning, all through the day, except for his workouts and those little breaks, he's definitely an incredible mind. I'm going to put something on the screen here and just set it up, and then see if you can let me have some fun with it. This is the audiobook of The Lost Treasures Volume 1. And so I was listening to this. I couldn't stop listening to it because of what comes out of the book. So I'm going to play a clip and then just have you say anything you want about it.
Sure.
I'll comment as well. So let me see if I can get into and I'm going to start it now. We'll listen to a couple minutes. Just give me a nod when you hear it, if the sound is okay. Here we go.
I figured it for Indians, maybe, or a herd of cows. But when I came up to the river, I seen it wasn't. What was it? Fish, he said, swimming upriver, hunting for water. After that, we didn't talk much, and it came to be mighty tiring out there. He kept falling back, and I kept urging him on, as he seemed to be getting weaker and weaker by the minute. Finally, I was so dry I couldn't talk, and I left off yelling at him. I just kept slogging along, and next time I looked back, he was nowhere in sight. But it was still moonlight, and I could see a little way. I stopped and tried to yell, but couldn't make a sound above a whisper. I walked on into the night, more than half asleep, right on my feet. I stumbled a time or two, but it was the need for sleep more than anything else, and I was fairly walking in my sleep, when suddenly there was a whisper of something behind me, and I made to turn. Something crashed down on my skull, and the last thing I recalled was dust in my throat, which was already dry enough. It was the sun brought me out of it, the hot sun on my back. I rolled over. The sun hit me in the eyes, and it hurt. I struggled up, my skull throbbing, and slowly it all came back to me. My rifle was gone. My gun belt and holster were gone. Even the few coins in my pocket were gone. And a letter I had offering me a job on a ranch near Wagon Mound, that was gone. Worst of all, he'd taken my boots. Those boots didn't come up to much. They were old and about wore out, but they were all I had, and he knew it. And a man without boots wasn't going to get far. Only I was. Right about then, I was mad enough to spit, had I anything to spit with.
Okay, I'm just going to pause it there and tell us anything you want about that and the audiobook world, just getting it to sound like that. And the last thing I want to throw on there is to listen to that. And I read in the book that your dad would write, and what he wrote is what he wrote. That's what went into the book. There wasn't a ton of editing and changing. Tell me if I'm wrong on that, but that's incredible if you listen to that and to think about somebody just wrote that out of their brain.
Yeah, so first off, just from a technical standpoint, it sounds like it was speeded up a little bit.
I did. I speeded up.
Yeah.
I should have said that. Yeah, for sure.
And so
yeah, it was about 1.2 the speed, just to confirm
right.
that.
Right. So, casting is a big element to doing audio publishing, and it's really remarkable. It's always a crapshoot. You can hire somebody who has done an incredible job on a particular book, or an actor that you particularly like. But there are quite a few actors that cannot read. They can't read to save their lives, and that.
Hang on a second. I got to just riff on that.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking about all the movies I've seen, and they have to get their screenplay and read their lines. That's incredible. What you said.
I have actually known a couple of actors, classic old actors that you've seen dozens of times. I'm not going to mention their names.
Sure.
Who truly could not read. So their wife or girlfriend or something would sort of read them the script or record it for them, and then they would learn how to do it. But that's not what I was talking about. I meant read, like open the book and read from the page. Most actors, when they're doing what we know them for, their work in film or TV or theater, they will memorize their lines, and then they will perform their lines from the motivation of their character, and that's a completely different thing than picking up a page and pretty much cold reading it.
Yeah,
there are very few actors that can do that. I remember David Strathairn, who's a wonderful character actor. I was driving from someplace in the United States to another place, and I picked up a copy of I think it was L.A. Confidential by James Ellroy
Yeah.
that he had read. It's one of those in that series, and a couple of those books are extremely difficult to read. They are like a combination of the narration from Dragnet and beatnik poetry.
Hmm.
And David Strathairn was reading this book without a blink. I mean, he just did it. He did it so well. And I was like, we have to hire that guy because he can read anything. And so we did. We used David Strathairn quite a few times.
Yeah.
But so casting is a big part of it. And you were about to say something. Go ahead.
No, was that who was doing this audiobook?
No.
I didn't write that down. Yeah.
And then the section of the book, this is this guy who meets this kind of scalawag type of character who's always got kind of a weird story about stuff and is very tricky and trickstery. And of course, it's being Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures. It's unfinished. We don't know what the relationship between these two guys is going to be, but there's a whole adventure where they're getting to know one another that's in that book. It doesn't go on from there, but we get to see them dealing with one another for a couple of chapters.
Yeah. Everyone, we're here with Beau L'Amour and Louis L'Amour's son about the legacy of all that work. Yeah, the audiobook was something else. And what I love about audiobook is you can go in and bookmark, you can print things out. There's a lot of education in the work your dad wrote about, like a lot of history and things that I don't even know as a Canadian born in the UK with parents back to India and Fiji. I mean, I'm all mixed up. But you learn a lot from reading his stuff. Something that came to mind and wanted to ask you when I read this was he seemed to experiment, or some of the pieces of his work were in different genres. So I think, would it be fair to say he was known as Western? Did the sector get that right? Or was there a reason why he stayed in that genre? Because some of the stuff he wrote outside of that genre I thought was pretty amazing.
This is a really remarkable story that's kind of unique to being told in these books. My dad started writing for the pulp magazines, and the subject matter of the pulps was divided very, very, very narrowly. So it wasn't just like westerns, mysteries, stuff like this. There was actually Sky Fighters, which was adventure stories that all had to do with aviation. There was ranch romances, which was all slightly female-oriented westerns. There were all kinds of different areas. And as a unknown, I wouldn't say an unknown pulp writer, but a pulp writer that hadn't gotten locked down into one particular area or not, he could write for any of those magazines. And Standard magazines, the editorial group that he wrote for, had dozens and dozens of different magazines. So he could kind of do anything he wanted. World War II came along. After the war, the Westerns became more prevalent. He wrote a lot of Westerns for the pulps. He nearly starved to death having to shift his career from pulp magazines to paperback originals when the pulp magazines died in the early 50s. And then just getting started writing Westerns in the paperback originals, he wrote quite a few. He wrote 12, 15 Westerns to very much get established. And then he kind of wanted to break out and do other things. Unfortunately, right at this moment, this was maybe 1958 to 1960 era, the paperback books up until then were distributed on racks that belonged to the publisher. And so you knew what publisher your favorite author published with, and you went there and you looked for, alphabetically where that author was.
Sure.
Well, as there became more and more paperbacks and more of them stayed in print, the old model was like the magazine model where you just got rid of them after a couple months. But they were better books. They started staying in print. And bookstores had to accommodate all these titles. So they didn't like the racks that were by publisher. They wanted to integrate all the publishers. And when they did that, they created this very strict version of genres where certain authors were kind of stuck in that genre, so that you could find Louis L'Amour, you'd go to the
Yeah.
You go to the Western section. If you wanted to find Robert Heinlein, you'd go to the science fiction section. And from that point on, the publishers put a lot of pressure on their writers. Do not leave your genre because no one will be able to find your books.
Wow.
And
That's
so,
incredible.
unfortunately, right about the time that started happening, Dad started saying, well, I've written a bunch of Westerns. I like writing them. I'll keep writing them, but I want to write other stuff. And he
Yeah.
started experimenting with other work, wrote quite a bit of it, a bunch of unfinished things in the Lost Treasures books, but also a very well-known novel of his, The Walking Drum, which is a kind of Crusades era adventure in Europe and the Near East.
Mhm.
That was written in that time. He couldn't get that published for 25 years. It was a huge bestseller when it finally came out in the 80s, but it was written in 1958.
This is called The Walking
1960.
Drum.
The Walking Drum. Uh-huh.
We'll have to put
And
that in the show notes.
yeah, and Last of the Breed, which is a Cold War thriller that was also written in the 1980s, that concept he came up with in that time period. It was very much based on the Gary Powers incident when the U-2 plane was shot down in Russia.
Yes.
And so there was a time when he was trying to change his career and branch out. It didn't work. He went back to writing Westerns. I was born, so there was financial pressure on the family. My sister was born. There was more financial pressure on the family. He went back and kept pushing on the Westerns. And then he did this kind of remarkable thing. He decided to very gently, because the Western audience is very brittle. They want what they want, and they do not want anything else. And he started kind of stretching the genre. And he did this by writing a contemporary mystery that had its background in the West. He did this by writing a Western that was about a British safari in the West, which did happen, but it isn't something that was terribly well known. He got a bunch of blowback from that. People, there was a lot of fans who were sort of like, no, if we're reading about a Western, we only want to read about somehow American characters, as if anybody was, I mean, so many people hadn't been born in the United States at the time, but they're sort of like, no, just American characters in Westerns. And he wrote some stuff that had some kind of mystical feeling to it, stories that started out at sea or in the Far East and came to the United States.
Yep.
And then the early frontier, the pre-Civil War frontier, the pre-colonial frontier, and he started kind of gently opening, what we would call today the Overton window.
Yeah.
And finally was at the point where he could just say, "Oh, here, take The Walking Drum, sell that book. My fans will accept it. They're willing to take anything now."
Yeah, I'm gonna get that one too. I like that whole approach. In the book Volume 1 that you sent me, there's it caught me off guard, but there's some stuff in there about Canadian history, and I really enjoyed that. And I think, I'm just thinking out loud here, I grew up, my father-in-law who's passed long ago from Italy, but he watched Westerns. He'd watch TV all the time, The Rifleman, and, we all grew up with Western shows. My parents would watch, Bonanza. I remember taking a car trip down to the U.S. and going to the ranch where they filmed that thing.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. And my wife loves horses, so there's a lot of this feeling and things in my head about Westerns. However, I do like that shift, and I like how your dad was brilliant, because that shift, first thing I thought about is, how do you come up with all those ideas? Did you actually go live that, or did you do a lot of research? But it sounds like he did a fair amount of research, maybe through experiences too with other people, right?
It's true. He had also, in the 1920s, when it was very wild and different, he had traveled throughout the Far East and the Indonesia, places like that. He'd been a merchant seaman, so he had been to places that a lot of people in that era had not been to. I mean, he was a kid. He was working on board ship, but he wasn't necessarily off widely traveling the world outside of where the ship's crew would go.
I see.
But he did experience a lot of different places. And I think a great talent of a novelist is to be able to extrapolate their experiences, however broad or limited, onto other experiences.
Yeah.
And I'd say these things are similar to one another. I've been to British Columbia or Canada, therefore I have some idea of what, say, southern New Zealand or southern Chile is like.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. For all the fans of the show here, many people read nonfiction or business books, and then there's novels and this type of work that your dad did. I find that I can't put this down. It's I think it's rooted in brain science that I've researched a lot about. In a traditional story, I realize like your dad's done a great job in this book, or you got like protagonist and antagonist, and you've got some enmity, something we don't like. And it's like a roller coaster of up and downs. And then there's hope. And then there's something that appears. It's classic almost. That sometimes I think about hero's journey of the narrative behind the show I do here. And I think that's for escaping from this world. That's some of the best things to read personally. I encourage people all the time, and I come from a CEO pedigree, that my pals to go read these books. Get into them, man, because this one here, the other thing that's really cool, somebody told me, and I just want to say this as an experiment. I read the book and I listened to the audiobook at the same time. Somebody said you can get a completely different experience. And, oh yeah, what an incredible experience that was. Yeah. So, but I want to say thank you to the work you're doing, but also to your dad for writing story, because I really believe the power of story, especially for mental health and for escaping sometimes from the day-to-day is incredible. Everyone, we're here in Plato's Garden, getting to the end of our journey. I want to just touch on one other question here about I call it the chapter unwritten, what's next? And so after 3 decades or so of stewardship of this legacy, Beau, this is particular for you. What's your vision for the next 30 years or of your dad's work, or the next, whatever you can think out? Well, I mean, what's in your head about what the future looks like? Anything you can share?
Sure. I have just finished another novel, sort of co-written, Louis and Beau L'Amour, and I have no idea when that's coming out yet. The publishing business does not get around to things very, very quickly. So it could be, it could be a year from now or so, but I've just wrapped that up. I'm experimenting more with the movie business. I was kind of disillusioned with that, sort of walked away from it 20 years ago or so. And I'm kind of going there again. I'm never quite sure what's gonna turn out. It's a lot of different personalities have inputs on things. No one is really totally as in control as they would like to be. But I'm hopeful that the screenwriters will do their best and the directors will do their best. All those people are often, circumvented by other forces. But I'm hoping things will turn out. At the very least, we'll spread Louis' name around a little more. And
was there any film made from his work?
About 40 of them.
Wow.
Yeah, no, quite a few. We've never really had one that was done particularly well, and I'm equally critical of projects that I worked on in the past. It's that same thing. It's sort of like if everybody isn't marching in the same direction, you kind of get something that's not so good. When you see top filmmakers make really good movies, it's because they're terrific at getting all the many ducks in a row. And so we're hoping for the best, but it's always a question.
I know we talked just before you came on about having you back. Just from what you said got me thinking, I got to have you back to talk more about this angle. One of the things I wrote down on my paper here in the macro area, so I guess that would be in the sector, is the responsibility that comes with maintaining the cultural touchstones of the work that he's done. And when I think about what you said about film, it absolutely resonates with me. Whatever that film looks like, it has to be what the intention was of the work. You mentioned disillusionment. Is there a quick thing there? What was the disillusionment? Was it the process in the industry of film, the outcome of what you were trying to do before?
It's a rough, I think everybody knows it's a rough business.
Hmm.
And there's also, and this is going to seem a little tangential, but it's really the foundation behind many of the things that become problematic. I think there is something inherently corrupting about the management of celebrity.
Hmm.
And there are the people who manage celebrities, but then there are all the people that also manage turning those celebrities into celebrities. And it's the closer you get to the work, the closer
Hmm.
you get to the people who actually make the films, the less of that you see. When I'm talking to people about it, I often say there are two kinds of people in Hollywood. There
Hmm.
are the people who make movies, and there are the people who get movies made.
I see.
And the people who get movies made are the creative executives and the people like that, people who work at the studios. And then there's this intervening group, which would be the writers and directors and
Hmm.
producers, who kind of have a foot in both camps. And then you have all of the incredibly hardworking, you know, makeup artists and grips and gaffers and cameramen and things like that. And, those people are generally uh, kind of above reproach. I mean, they can be as weird as anybody on earth, but you've never met a group of people more willing to get up at 4 a.m. and work for 12 hours.
Yeah. Wow.
They're hard-working
Yeah.
people.
We'll have to get for the show notes when we release this production. You said there's 40 films, but where can you find any of that body of work? I was thinking about the fact that when your dad started doing his work, it was obviously back in the day. And some people don't know much about the publishing industry, and I don't want to go down that hole. But I do know, like when I published my first book in 2017, there's a contract between the publisher, and then there's traditional publishing, and then there's other types of publishing. And just in general, all of the work that he left behind, the royalties or whatever income from it, the rights to that work, is it all part of the estate and now owned by your family, or is it more complicated than that?
But it's not more complicated than that. I mean, we have an overall deal with Random House as
Okay,
the conduit for exploiting that material.
I see.
But it's pretty much what you said.
Oh, okay. Because I heard some horror stories just from friends of mine who did some publishing, that manuscripts, what you wrote when it went to the publisher. Like I have one fellow who wrote something, and he said, I got 40,000 edits back, and I felt like saying to them, well, you probably wrote a bunch of shit, because obviously it wasn't up to the standard. But then I've heard other things, that some contracts are written where the author just doesn't have a clue, and then all of a sudden the book's made into a movie and they don't have the rights to that and all of that. So it's good to hear that the legacy and the work you're doing with your dad's collection and beyond is in good hands with you. What do you do in your spare time for fun besides all this?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I do a lot of this. We have some property in Colorado, which takes a certain amount of maintenance. I kind of like old cars. I have a 1973 Alfa Romeo GTV
Ooh,
that
that's cool.
I drive around. It's a wonderful car. You can have a lot of fun with it without exceeding the speed limit by very much.
Is that parked in your garage where you are now at the house?
It is.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. So, I have my little list, my hit list of people I want to visit that I've met through the show. So you're on the list.
Very good.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of fun. Let me just go now to honoring you with a couple of things. If you watch some other broadcasts, you'll see that we always like to honor you at the end with some cool stuff. So I'm going to put on the screen here. I have a level of integrity when I do my show. Every author who sends me a book, I read it cover to cover, and I promise if it's good work and I like to promote it, I'll write a review. So we're going to reveal an international review for the book you did send me. So I'm just going to put that on the screen. And to set this up, everyone, this is a review that was posted. It was actually just approved on Amazon.ca, and most people know what that is. And I'll be putting it on Goodreads. And so let's put it on the screen and just sit back and I want to read it. And you can use this clip out of the show for marketing or whatever. So there it is on the screen, and just stand by while I get set to read it. So we're just going to revealing today the international review for this beautiful book that I've received, Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures Volume 1. Now, I bought the audiobook as well. I wanted to make sure this review was a verified purchase. And so here we go. The title of it is Unearthing Literary Gold, L'Amour's Genius Beyond the Grave. Verified purchase, 5 out of 5 stars. There are a few moments in a reader's life when you feel you've been granted access to something truly special. This collection is one of those rare treasures. As a Canadian who has long appreciated the rich tapestry of North American history, I found myself utterly transformed by these previously unpublished gems from the master's storyteller's vault. The audiobook version deserves particular praise. The voice performances are nothing short of extraordinary, bringing each character and setting to vivid life. From the chilling opening of Jeremy Locard, a Western horror that had me checking over my shoulder, to the heartbreaking first chapters of the Trails of Tears, the narrators don't just read, they channel L'Amour's spirit with every inflection. I often found myself sitting in my parked car long after reaching my destination, unable to break the spell. What makes this collection particularly fascinating is how it reveals L'Amour's versatility beyond Western genre. The international espionage of the Golden Tapestry and the ambitious reincarnation saga that spans from prehistoric times to warlord-era China showcase a literary mind that constantly pushed boundaries. Beau L'Amour, thoughtful commentary adds invaluable context, creating a kind of literary archaeology that lets us peer into his father's creative process. The educational value cannot be overstated. L'Amour's meticulous research shines through in his portrayals of both Canadian and American historical settings. His attention to geographical and cultural details offers a masterclass in how fiction can illuminate history. I've learned more about our shared continental history from these pages than from many textbooks. Having both the hardcover and the audiobook versions have been a revelation. I can read the actual manuscripts and notes at home, continue the journey through my own audio during my commute. This immersive approach has made me feel like I'm participating in a literary excavation of the highest order. If you cherish storytelling that transports while it teaches, that entertains while it enlightens, do yourself a favor and experience this collection immediately. Volume 2 is already on my buy list, and I suspect it will be on yours too after experiencing the first installment. And here's my final thought. As someone who will soon be interviewing Beau L'Amour, well, we are now, about his father's legacy, I can say with confidence that this project represents one of the most thoughtful and illuminating approaches to persevering a literary giant's work that I've ever encountered. Don't just read these stories, let them read you. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Okay. You know, I always do that, and then I wait to see the reaction. And when there's few words and speechless, that makes me happy.
That was great.
Now you can I'll send you the digital copy of this. Certainly do anything you want with it. It is approved. I'll send you the link to the Amazon so you can see it's posted. And I want to do a shout out in honor of what you're doing because it's remarkable. I love you and your work and your dad's stuff that has a new connection to it. That author's work's generally not known, everyone. So go out there whenever you get these books, write the review, post it on places like Amazon, even Goodreads. And that way the work gets known. We can keep this legacy going. Last thing I want to do is honor you with an award. Did you know you're going to get something?
Oh.
Okay. Next time I ask you that, you go, yeah, I did. Okay. Well, we're inducting you into the Quiet Warrior tribe or community. And
Fantastic.
I know you're a man who has had many accolades like your dad. So this is a challenge coin. Do you know what challenge coins are?
I do indeed know what a challenge coin is. Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, you're already ahead of the rest because most people don't. So it comes with a little sleeve. Challenge coins for the audience were surfaced during World War I era. The practice of carrying a coin designed specifically for a unit was popular with the Army Special Forces. carrying the coin at all times and presenting it when challenged. To prove affiliation with that unit resulted in a number of consequences for those who could not produce a coin. The most popular required the coinless soldier to buy a round of drinks, and that continues, I believe, right till today. So the front of the coin is they're hand-painted and crafted in the U.S. The raised letters is the show emblem. The back, I'm biased, but this is the hero's journey narrative illustrated.
Yeah, sure.
And it's so intricate. And so this will be coming to you. I'll have to get offline the address. So welcome and congratulations. You're part of the global community.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And of course, this is an award to you and your father, late Father Louis, who I'm totally impressed by the things that you've done. So on that note, let's give you the last word. Tell us anything you want that maybe you haven't said today and where we can get a hold of all of this work that you've talked about.
I think that going to louislamour.com, where you can find all of this to buy, but also you can find an incredible amount of additional information on my dad. We have quite a few associated websites that some of them do a very deep dive on our various projects. I think there's a couple of others, but there's a website specifically about the making of Law of the Desert Born. It's got some video on it and it's got some audio on it and a lot of different information on the people involved. And we have the same thing on some of our more in-depth audio publishing projects, the audio drama type projects. And there's also a website called Louis L'Amour Great Adventure, which documents in kind of a fun way, kind of an amusing way, the pulp adventure writing that my dad did, and kind of takes you through all those stories, introduces you to all those various stories.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was just madly making notes. I'll get all this from you. But so the louislamour.com site, are there links connecting to the other sites, or is that?
There are. Yeah,
okay, beautiful.
Navigation bar at the top, and one of the things says other websites.
Oh, that's fantastic. So love it. So there you have it, everyone. Go to that website and just fill your boots, get all the books you want, read, listen, write some reviews. It's been a real pleasure. You're such a treasure, man. You're so talented. So thank you for doing this with us. And I want to have you back again to talk some more.
You're too generous. And I thank you so much. Anything I can do to help you, let me know.
Yeah, ride in that car one day.
Sure. Come on down.
Oh, right. It's on my list. Well, everyone, find that true passion and purpose like you've heard from Beau here and like you'll read in the works of his dad, and live the life that you deserve and desire. Lots going on the Quiet Warrior Show. We're booked right out till August every week, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you very much, Beau.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Quiet Warrior Show. Create is a motive-based leadership development firm. www.kreat.ca.
All right, stand by. We're going to take us offline here. Ending stream.